By the 11th week, without real rain, Raymond Collins's new well had stopped giving water. The pump coughed, shook, and then burned out. Raymond had already spent $25,400 drilling 318 feet into the ground. Now a water truck stood beside his barn, and his corn had turned the color of old paper. 2 farms away, Elias Mast walked to a black hand pump beside his house. Elias was 62 years old. His gray-brown beard reached his chest, and there was no mustache above his mouth. He wore a plain straw hat, a faded blue shirt, and dark suspenders. Nothing about him looked rich or modern. He worked the handle 6 times. Cold water poured into a metal bucket. Behind him, apple trees still carried green leaves. A strip of corn on the hillside stood straight, and the grass around his pasture had not turned brown. Across that same hill, 7 long curves of green followed the shape of the land. Raymond stared at them from the road. 17 months earlier, he had called those curves the work of a crazy man. Now he was standing at Elias's gate with 3 other farmers, asking the same question. "Will you show us where to dig?" If you have ever watched someone get mocked for solving a problem in a different way, subscribe to the channel now. Elias did not find a hidden river, and he did not perform a miracle. He simply stopped throwing away the water that already fell on his land. To understand how, we need to go back 17 months to a wet morning in Holmes County, Ohio. Elias and his wife, Lydia, lived on 34 acres that had belonged to his father. Their house stood near the bottom of a long hill. Above it were 12 acres of corn, pasture, and a small apple orchard. The family followed the rules of their Amish church district. They did not connect their home to the public electric grid, and Elias used horses for most field work. A small diesel engine powered a few stationary tools in the barn. The farm was traditional, but Elias wasn't afraid of a useful idea. Water was the problem he could not ignore. The old well beside the house was only 64 feet deep. Its hand pump looked simple, but the working cylinder sat far below the ground, so it could lift water from deeper than an ordinary shallow pump. The well had served the family for 41 years, but each dry summer, the water level fell a little farther. Elias could have hired a driller to make a deeper well, yet the price was more than he could safely pay. His neighbor Raymond believed deeper was the only answer. Raymond was 55 and farmed 120 acres with tractors and electric pumps. That spring, he hired Gordon Pike, a well driller from the next county. Gordon arrived with a tall drilling rig, 3 trucks, and an offer for Elias. "I can do both farms while the machine is here," Gordon said. 300 feet, new casing, high-flow pump. About $25,000 if the rock behaves. Elias looked up at the steel tower. "And if the rock does not behave?" "Then it costs more," Raymond laughed. "You cannot farm on a question mark, Elias. A deep hole is still a question mark until water comes out." Gordon handed Elias a card, but Elias put it in his pocket and went back to his horses. 3 weeks later, a spring storm dropped more than 2 inches of rain before noon. Water rushed down Elias's hill, carrying loose soil across the lane. By afternoon, a brown stream was flowing into the roadside ditch. Elias stood in the rain and watched. The farm was not short of water that day. It had too much. The problem was that almost all of it was leaving. Near the old orchard, a rotten fence rail had fallen into a shallow hollow. Water had gathered behind it, along with leaves and straw. When Elias lifted the rail, the wood was dark and soft. Even after the rain stopped, the soil under it stayed wet. He pushed his thumb into the wood. Water came out like it had come from a sponge. That evening, he drew the hill on a piece of brown paper. Lydia set a bowl of soup beside him. "Are you drawing a new field?" "I'm drawing the rain. Rain does not stay still. Maybe that is the problem." Elias's plan was simple. Instead of letting water run straight down the hill, he would dig shallow trenches across it. Each trench would follow one level line around the slope. The water would enter, slow down, spread out, and sink into the ground. He also planned to place old, partly rotten logs and branches in the bottom, cover them with straw, and then return some soil. The wood would not hold all the water by itself. Most of the water would move into the soil below, but the soft wood and straw could help keep the area moist, like a sponge under a kitchen towel. Elias built a level from 3 boards. It looked like a large letter A. From the top, he hung a string with a stone tied to the end. When the string fell over the center mark, the 2 feet of the frame stood at the same height. One step at a time, he marked a curve across the hill with small wooden stakes. Raymond saw the stakes from the road. "What are you building?" "A place for the rain to wait." Raymond looked at the wet hillside and laughed. "You are digging holes in the rain to save water for a drought that may not come. The rain is here now. So is mud." At the feed store, Raymond told the story to Martin Cole, who sold seed and fertilizer. By the time Elias returned for grass seed, 3 men were waiting with jokes. Martin pointed at a stack of drainage pipe. "Elias, most people pay to move water off a hill. You are trying to hold it there. Only long enough for the ground to drink. And the rotten wood? It stays wet longer than bare soil." Martin shook his head. "You are burying firewood and calling it irrigation." The strongest mockery came from Gordon Pike. He drove past, while Elias and 2 of his sons were clearing old apple logs from the edge of the orchard. "I heard about your wooden well," Gordon called. "It is not a well?" "Good, because wood does not drill very deep." Gordon told Elias that water came from rock, pumps, and money, not from shallow ditches. Elias did not argue. He knew a trench could not create rain. His only question was whether it could keep more rain on the farm. Over 6 days, Elias marked 5 curves. Together, they measured a little more than 1,100 feet. Each trench was about 3 feet wide and no more than 18 inches deep. They were shallow enough for a person to step across. Elias hired a local machine operator for 2 days to open the hardest ground. Then he and his sons finished the shapes with shovels and a horse-drawn scoop. They laid soft logs and branches loosely along the bottoms, leaving space for water. They added straw, returned some soil, and planted grass on the lower edges to protect them from erosion. The entire job cost $1,860, including the hired machine, seed, fuel, and a load of stone for safe overflow points. Lydia kept every receipt. "If this fails," she said, "we should at least know the price of the lesson." The first hard storm came 9 days later. Elias stood beneath the barn roof as water reached the highest trench. At first, everything worked. The fast sheet of rainwater slowed and spread along the curve. Then the west end filled too quickly. One wooden marker had been 3 inches too low. Water found that point, poured over the edge, and cut a narrow gully through the new grass. Mud and straw rushed downhill. Raymond watched from his truck. "Your rain is not waiting," he shouted. Elias ran into the storm with a shovel, but there was nothing safe he could do until the flow stopped. By evening, one end of the trench had collapsed. 2 apple logs lay in the lower field. The gully was almost 2 feet deep. Elias had tried to stop erosion and had created more of it. That night, he placed the muddy A-frame level by the kitchen door. For the first time, Lydia asked if they should fill the trenches back in. Elias looked at the rainwater still standing quietly in the 4 curves that had not failed. "One was wrong," he said. 4 were right. Have you ever had one mistake make everyone forget the parts that worked? If you believe a failure should teach you instead of name you, subscribe to the channel. Elias's first trench had broken, but it had also shown him exactly what he had to fix. The next morning, Elias checked the damaged curve from end to end. He used the A-frame twice at every mark and found the low point. Then he raised that end, packed the broken bank with soil, and planted thick grass over it. He also changed the whole system. Each curve received a wide, stone-covered overflow point leading into grass. If a storm brought more water than the soil could take, the extra water would leave slowly without cutting a new gully. Gordon passed again while Elias was placing stones. Fixing your wooden well? Fixing my mistake. A deeper well would already be finished. Then it would teach me nothing about this hill. The next 3 storms came and went without damage. Water gathered in the curves, sometimes 6 inches deep, and then disappeared into the ground over the next day. Mud that once reached the road now settled behind grass and straw. Elias did not see a miracle. He saw small changes. The pasture below the second curve stayed green 1 week longer than the open field. Apple trees near the third curve grew new leaves after a hot spell. When Elias pushed a shovel into the soil beside one buried log, he found dark moisture below the dry surface. By autumn, earthworms had moved into the soft ground. Grass roots held the lower banks together. During one rain, Elias filled 2 jars at the roadside ditch. The water leaving his field was almost clear, while runoff from an unprotected slope nearby was brown. The following spring, Elias added 2 more curves. He did not place them near the house, barn, or septic area. He kept the safe overflow points open and checked them after each storm. The 7 curves now crossed about 11 uphill acres. They did not look like deep ditches. Once grass covered the edges, they looked like long green lines wrapped around the hill. Raymond still called them Elias's snakes. Then May ended, and the rain stopped. June brought only a few light showers. July arrived with hot wind and days above 95 degrees. By August, Holmes County had gone 11 weeks without enough rain to soak the roots. Creeks became strings of shallow pools. Pasture grass broke under a boot. Farmers sold cattle early because hay prices had doubled. Raymond's deep well began to lose pressure. At first, the pump needed 5 minutes to fill a stock tank. Then, it needed 12. Gordon lowered the pump, but the water level kept falling. One afternoon, the well pulled air. The pump ran hot and burned out. The replacement cost $4,700, but a new pump could not lift water that was no longer entering the hole. Raymond brought in a water truck at $680 per load. Martin Cole had drilled a new well that spring for just over $27,000. By the first week of August, it produced less than 1 gallon a minute. His vegetable field turned brown from the edges inward. Gordon's drilling schedule filled for the next 9 weeks. Farmers were paying to deepen wells, but nobody could promise what they would find below the next layer of rock. Elias's farm was dry too. The tops of the hills were brown, and he lost part of his late corn. The curves had not created endless water, and he never claimed they would. But the difference was visible. The soil below the green lines still held moisture several inches down. The apple trees kept their leaves. The pasture gave the horses enough grass for 2 more weeks before Elias opened his hay barn. His early corn made smaller ears, but the plants did not die. Most important, his old 64-foot well continued to recover each night. At the beginning of summer, the water stood 22 feet below the ground. By the driest week, it had fallen to 31 feet. That was a serious drop, but the well was not empty. It still produced a little more than 3 gallons a minute, enough for the house and animals when used carefully. Elias stopped washing wagons, reused water where it was safe, and filled stock tanks before sunrise. He treated every gallon as if the next rain had not yet been promised. Raymond first believed Elias had found a hidden spring. He walked the fence between their farms and looked for a pipe. Then he noticed that the greenest plants followed the same curves he had laughed at. On the hottest afternoon of August, Raymond came to Elias's gate with Martin and 2 other farmers. Their hats were white with dust. "Is your well still giving water?" Raymond asked. Elias worked the hand pump until a clear stream struck the bucket. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Raymond looked up at the hill. "Will you show us where to dig?" Before Elias answers the men who mocked him, subscribe if you want more stories where patience becomes stronger than pride. The water under his farm was about to be measured, and the result was bigger than even Elias understood. Elias did not make the neighbors apologize before opening the gate. He led them up the hill and pushed his shovel beside the lowest curve. The top 2 inches were dry. Below that, the soil was dark and cool. He pulled out a small piece of soft wood. "This does not make water," he said. "It only helps the ground hold moisture. The real work happens because the rain stops running away." Raymond looked down the long green line. "How much can these ditches hold?" "I do not know." That honest answer mattered. The following week, a soil conservation technician named Rachel Monroe visited the farm. Elias had met her at a local field meeting and asked if she could check his numbers. Rachel measured the slopes, the length of the curves, and the area above them. She also checked the well level and compared wet soil near the curves with dry soil farther away. Her estimate was careful. If the system helped just 1 extra inch of rain sink into 11 acres instead of running off, that would place almost 300,000 gallons into the soil. Over several strong spring storms, the total could pass 1 million gallons. Not all of that water would stay until August. Trees would use some would move deeper, and some would travel slowly downhill under the surface. The logs held only a small part, but the curves gave the whole hillside more time to absorb water. Rachel explained it with Elias's own simple picture. "The hill used to act like a roof," she said. "Rain hit it and ran away. Now it acts more like a sponge." She could not prove that every gallon in Elias's well came from the curves. Underground water is too complex for that, but the soil readings, the reduced runoff, and the well's steady recovery all pointed in the same direction. Elias had improved the way his farm received rain. Raymond returned the next Saturday with work gloves. "I called you crazy," he said. "You did." "I was wrong." Elias handed him one end of the A-frame level. "Then hold this straight." Together they marked the first curve on Raymond's field. Elias refused payment. He did insist that Raymond ask a conservation worker to check the slope and safe overflow before digging. Martin came the next week. 2 months later, Gordon Pike came without his drilling truck. "I still believe in good wells," Gordon said. "So do I. But maybe we should help the ground before asking the drill to go deeper." Elias nodded. "That is cheaper than arguing with a dry hole." By the following spring, 9 farms in the area had built contour grass strips, shallow basins, or similar water-slowing systems suited to their own land. They did not copy Elias's plan without checking soil and slope. Some places needed grass instead of logs. Others needed stone outlets, or no trench at all. Elias's 7 green curves remained on the hill. When the next dry summer came, the neighbors still conserved water. Some crops still suffered. No one claimed the land had defeated drought forever. But fewer loads of muddy water left those hills during spring storms, and more moisture stayed where roots could reach it. The old well beside Elias's house never went dry during the Great Drought. People called him wise after that. Elias did not accept the word easily. "I was the same man when they called me crazy," he told Lydia. She closed the account book and smiled. "The hill was the same too. You were simply the first one who listened to it." Elias never fought the drought by digging deeper than everyone else. He fought it months earlier, while rain was still falling. Because the best time to save water is not when the well is empty. It is when the whole town thinks the rain will never end. If this story made you think differently about an old problem, tell us in the comments what lesson you took from Elias's Hill. Share it with someone who keeps working while others laugh, and subscribe for more stories about quiet people whose patience changes everything.